Generally Famous is proudly brought to you by Trade Depot. Generally famous for saving Kiwis thousands. Call into one of the stores or visit online at tradedepot.co.nz. Kia ora Aotearoa and welcome to Generally Famous. I'm Simon Bridges and every week I talk to generally famous but always interesting guests about life, love and what makes them tick. Distinguished journalist, now author and hailing from Northern Ireland, Andrea Vance, welcome to Generally Famous.
Thank you. I thought you said you had 4 nice words about me. I only counted 2.
Whoa, distinguished journalist counts as 2. What did I say? Now author. I was going to say renowned, but we don't know that yet, do we? Let's be honest. Northern Ireland is neutral, but I think that's nice. That was about 7.
Okay,
actually,
all right. Well, if you're counting not adjectives, it's fine.
Yes, well,
I won't quibble.
The school I went to, we didn't learn adjectives. I'm helping my children with these things right now. Actually, it's quite difficult when you don't know them yourself, but. As I have in my career, I fake it till I make it. Anyway, I feel like I know you very well, but actually I don't know that I do in a sense. I mean, we've never been out on a boozy night or at a long dinner or anything. I don't know how I first met you, but what I do remember, I think John Key warning us that you were very smart, pretty wily, and possibly scary. And then I think as a young cabinet minister, I did an interview with you, and I think those things were probably somewhat true, but it was enjoyable. I like you. And then over the years, we did more of that, and I think I would stick with that. You're smart, you're savvy. I think a little bit wily. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think wily's probably quite correct. I think those are probably more accurate adjectives than the first ones.
And you know, I suppose. What I'd like to know from you is what is the single favourite thing you remember about first meeting me?
Oh, well, probably not the first time I met you, because it would have been in sort of stand-ups or press conferences, but I have a very clear memory of my first, significant impression of you. And you probably won't remember this, but it was at a National Party conference. I think it was in Wigram at the Flight Museum down there. And it had been a long day or a couple of days, and you of course were one of the young guns. You and Nikki Kay were the up-and-comers, the ones to watch. And I remember you and Nikki came down to the press room and we were all filing madly about the day's speech, which I can't even remember what it was, and you brought us a whole lot of, like a platter of cheese and a couple of bottles of wine. And yeah, it was awesome. I was like, oh, I quite like these guys.
I mean, you know, we didn't pay for it, right? It was probably Wayne Eagleson or someone, the chief of staff, who said, Nikki, Simon.
Well, it did feel very natural, and you kind of sat around and had a bit of a yarn with us, and it was a really nice gesture, because often those things can be a bit tense and confrontational, and no one really wants us there. The delegates certainly hate having us around. So it was a really nice thing to do. So that always stood out in my mind as not the first time I met you, but
I mean, you don't sort of do that so much anymore, do you? You're not there at those. I mean, did you enjoy that part of the gig?
I did. I did about 10 years in the gallery, and of course I loved it. It's the most exciting place to work, I think, in New Zealand journalism, because if the big stories don't start there, they certainly often end there. So, and it's so fast paced, and the adrenaline, and you get to interview and talk to some very smart people all day, every day, and I weirdly love select committees. I don't know why, but I just love attending select committees. Sometimes I just tune in. I love them, because it's a really great way to see who was good, like which MPs were really making their mark by the questions they asked and their performance. So I love that. The party conferences I did not love so much, because of course you had to do them on the weekend, but also, and I don't want to offend anyone, but people that go to party conferences on a weekend for fun and are not being paid for are just a bit weird.
I didn't say that. I don't believe that, by the way, to all my former friends and supporters.
It's very important.
Yeah.
It's very important work, but still, it wouldn't be how I chose.
And it is a minority sport these days. It's not as if, I mean, I recently attended, not a political one, but an AGM on a Friday night, and I just thought, this is not what normal people do. I think you're right. You grew up in Northern Ireland. Where were you?
I grew up just outside Belfast. And it was, I grew up in that time during the Troubles, so that you will have was probably your only exposure to Northern Ireland in the media up until Derry Girls first aired a couple of years ago.
We're coming to that.
Oh, we are coming to that.
You put me onto that, and I loved it.
Oh, did you watch it?
Oh, yes, but look, don't spoil that. Let's build the suspense of Derry Girls. I don't know why I passed over it sort of 18 times on Netflix. The short didn't do anything for me. But anyway, let's come to that.
It's very good. So I remember as a teenager sitting up and watching when the Belfast Agreement was signed at Stormont, and it was very tense, and we'd all voted on it, and I had this tiny little portable, those huge TVs with the big backs,
yes.
And it was perched on my bedside table, and just sitting up watching it late into the night, and it just was such a feeling of excitement, because it was like, oh, we might get normal. This might be normal life after this. And it just felt like a time of great optimism and hope, because I was trying to explain this to my husband. It's such the weirdest thing. We had these ads that would run, TV ads would run before streaming, of course, in between Coronation Street or the news or whatever.
You're in the media. You need to watch the ads. Someone has to.
I know. The ads are, these ads were
they
remarkable.
Pay for it.
But these ads were advertising peace. So they're basically like, don't beat the shit out of each other. It could be good. And set to the music of Van Morrison. So they were really, when I was a teenager, it was kind of that grunge era, and these catchy little rock tunes, and they were like, don't kill each other, it's going to be awesome. So it was a very weird thing to advertise peace on television, but that was the strange place I grew up in.
But do you feel like you were... was it scary growing up? Because I suppose, my sense would be people don't actually, growing up, feel scared, even if objectively they should, because it's what you grow up with, right? And it's the normal, whether it's a household with problems, or whether it's in Northern Ireland amongst the Troubles.
It was normal for there to be soldiers and cops on street corners with guns, and it was normal to have your handbag or your school bag searched as you went into a shopping centre, and it was normal to for places to be evacuated. Bomb scares were normal. We joked about them. It was normal to have politicians on TV where their voices were dubbed because they were...
Yeah, what was that about? I saw this on Derry Girls and I couldn't understand it.
It was so strange. So the very idea that Gerry Adams would be allowed to talk on the BBC was an outrage. And, for obvious reasons, people were very offended by him. And so you saw his face, but then it was the voice of an actor's face.
This somehow neutralised him somehow.
I don't know why anyone thought this was a good idea. But Northern Ireland is full of funny little quirks and symbolisms, and to the outside world, it makes total sense to most of us, but to the outside world, it's mad. Like our obsession with, as we call them, flags. Obsessed with flags. Flying any kind of flag will get you into a world of trouble at home.
Yeah. Because I think I'm right to say your father was a journalist, may still be a journalist. But and so, at that level, maybe you had some professional objectivity about what he did about these things. But were you, even if it was secretly, were you on a side growing up?
So my mum's family was one side, and my dad was totally neutral, and so we were brought up totally neutral, so I never had a side. I suppose,
in a way, does that make it more perplexing though?
Well, no, because it's just normal, and I understand all the arguments. Like I understand why the IRA were fighting for what they were fighting for, and I understand why unionists were opposed to that, because they're sort of fighting for their very identity, I guess. For Republicans or Catholics, I guess maybe the fight was so much more pronounced. It was much more vital, because it was things about employment and where you could go to school and jobs and your very survival. So maybe in one sense it did seem more one-sided, but yeah, it's just normal. It just didn't until you move away, I guess. It's awful. Yeah, it's horrendous. Absolutely, don't get me wrong. It's terrible, terrible time. But when you're in the middle of it, I didn't know anything else, really.
And you've just been recently back there. And when were you there last?
The last I went back at Christmas, New Year, 1920. So just before COVID turned our lives upside down. So it was nearly 2.5 years before I'd see my family. So.
And you've been living in New Zealand, what, am I right, about 15 years?
Not quite. I think it's 11 or 12. I think it might be 12 at the end of the year. Right. So it was only meant to be 2.
You're almost a teenager.
Oh, yeah. It was only meant to be 2, but it's not worked out that way.
I know that feeling. That was like Tauranga for me. And then somehow I became the Member of Parliament and, I was strolling along the beach. It was wonderful. But, and I enjoyed that, by the way. But what was it like going back, recently post-COVID?
Really, really, really good. Really good. Like, I'm sure lots of people are feeling like that. And you're about to,
yes,
you and your wife's family are about to head back and do all that. The relief was enormous because I'd been clinging on to this. I tried not to think about it in the 2.5 years, but I would often wake up in the night and just be terrified that something was going to happen and I couldn't get back. Like the thought of that was just unbearable to me. So I'd try not to think about it, and I just kept, every time there was an announcement that the border would remain closed, I'd be sort of, but just move on to the next thing and I'll get there eventually, and just kind of praying nothing would happen. And I was really lucky. No one got sick. Nothing happened.
Because you've got what, mum, dad, siblings?
Yeah, mum, dad, sister, and then extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles.
And are you close to them?
Yeah, well, as close as you can be living on the other side of the world.
Are you like my wife Natalie, who has like 19 WhatsApp sort of messages going between the hours of 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. and then sort of I don't know what it is, but 5:30 p.m. and 10 p.m. and it's annoying when I watch anything on Netflix or something. She's always distracted by these ridiculous sort of issues and debates she's having with her sister and her mother, and even her sisters' husbands' mothers on there now. I mean, it's like I just can't understand it. But I mean, is that?
Yeah, it's pretty. I do have ridiculous. Probably with my mum and my sister. My dad doesn't have a phone. He refuses to engage in the modern world. But
I like your father.
Yeah, I think you probably would. Although he dislikes politicians. But you're a former politician, so you're reformed.
That's right. I'm a broadcaster these days, Andrea.
This is true. Yeah, and actually, I think I was just thinking about this the other day. My dad once, the piece of advice he gave to me was, this is a very typical Irishman, he said, never trust a teetotaler. So I was just reading Christopher Luxon's comments the other day about how he doesn't drink, he's never drunk, and I was thinking, that would not go down well with my dad.
I have nothing to say about that. It's too soon, but it's an interesting comment you make there. Now, how did you... I suppose I'm trying to ask you, how did you find Northern Ireland this time? I mean, you've obviously been back, but I mean, is it a different country or a different place than you grew up in? Yeah,
definitely. So I've been away like maybe 20, I'm showing my age now, but roughly 20 years, roughly. I've lived in different places.
She came here when she was 7.
Yeah. So it's changed every time I go back, even when I was going back really regularly, sort of every few months. But the pace has sort of accelerated. So we just celebrated I think a quarter of a century since the Belfast Agreement. And when I was home, they had quite a significant election where Sinn Féin became the First Minister. The largest number in Stormont. So quite a significant election, although I'm not going to go into details, but not quite as significant as was painted because nothing's really changed. But
I feel like we could have an election like that sometime in the next couple of years. But
I wish.
This is not a podcast about politics, I just want to say, but yeah.
No, I was geeking out. I loved it. It was great. It was really interesting. I loved being there for the election. And did the thing that journalists do the world over, like go to the pub and sit in the corner with the other journalists.
Yes.
So, but anyway, so it has...
Because Juno's over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some really interesting journalists. So
I mean, being somewhere else changes your perception of the place. Being here and then going over there, how does that make you think about it all?
It's interesting that you asked me that because I have actually been thinking about that a lot because of the enforced separation in the distance. Although I chose to move away, when I was reading your book, I actually thought about this a lot. It kind of crystallized some of the things I was thinking. your book National Identity, obviously. That kind
Thank
of
you. I didn't ask her to do that, by the way, for those
Well, I
listening.
feel
It was
like I
not
should-
National Identity, Simon Bridges, in all good bookstores. It's still there, by the way. You know, some considerable... It had a lot of bad luck because it hit during lockdown, Auckland lockdown. I'm sure there were thousands more copies to be sold, but it is still a good book.
You went to number one, though. If I sell that many copies, I'll be delighted.
I think you will.
We'll see. But so you were sort of examining yourself and who you are and where you stood in the world. And I was thinking about this not just because of your book, but because I was being made to be away. And I guess the thing I was thinking is, I don't have a New Zealand passport. I'm entitled to one now, but I've never applied for one because I just don't feel like a New Zealander. I'm not a Kiwi, and even though I immerse myself in it every day and I write about it for a living, and I guess COVID really, really hardened that in me. I felt, and I think a lot of other people who weren't born here and are expats who've moved here, immigrants, if you like, felt very alienated and isolated. Well, not everyone, obviously. Some people, didn't feel that, but there was a sense that, with the people who were stranded abroad, the anger that was directed at them and the feeling that, well, they should have come home, or, the idea that how dare they live overseas than in this great country.
It was strange, wasn't it?
It was I just felt like I have never felt as less part of a community, I think, as I've ever felt in my entire life. I really didn't like it. This is not a criticism, it's just an observation. But I felt like I obviously consume a lot of content, a lot of podcasts, a lot of news, a lot of culture from home. And so I was absorbing the way that Irish and British people responded to it with that typical gallows, this is a very Irish thing, but that gallows humour, that sort of making light of everything. And whereas in New Zealand, everyone felt like everyone was taking everything so seriously.
We can be a bit earnest.
Yeah, earnest is the perfect word. Yeah. Absolutely. You're crossing into journalism there with your good words.
Right. Earnest. How do I even spell that? My sons could though. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I felt like I think I would have not coped better, but I would have had a better reaction if I had been at home and kind of we're all in this together, and the way that Ireland always deals with things, and
because
the British
I presume
too.
Now in Northern Ireland, when you're over there, COVID isn't even a thing. They're just getting on. Or
no,
would
yeah,
that be...
you meet the odd person who, that 6 degrees of separation, someone who has COVID. No one's wearing masks and everyone's travelling, and the airports are in chaos and whatnot. We've moved on to the next crisis, which is cost of living, so everyone's moaning about the cost of tea bags or whatever. I was thinking about this constantly, like who, as you were, I guess, when you were writing, like who am I and where do I fit in the world, and what am I? Because I always had this intellectual view, I guess, that, I'm very pro-immigration, and I get very annoyed with anti-immigration arguments, because I think that we're very, very lucky in where we're born. You and I were lucky because we were born in comfortable, wealthy countries, and and it was just by chance, those circumstances. We weren't born in Syria or Ukraine or somewhere like that. And so I sort of feel like, why shouldn't people have a chance to move countries and
So would you say, you'll be familiar with the, it's, what is it, anywheres or somewheres? You're a sort of an anywhere.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Everyone should have a chance.
And in a way, I suppose maybe it's me talking, you're not a nationalist. I mean, I on a bad day or a good day, I probably can be quite nationalistic.
No, definitely not.
Where would be your happy places? I suppose Māori have a tūranga waiwai, where would you sort of say you...
I was, in my rambling way, I was kind of getting to that. So I was intellectually, that was what I was thinking. That's what I thought. I always believed that borders don't matter. If you have a chance for a better life, you should take it and no one should stand in your way. Practicalities notwithstanding, and services and infrastructure and all those arguments that go along with the immigration debate. And I thought, I can live out of a suitcase, I can be happy anywhere. Although I did miss home. But with the enforced separation, and then when I went home, I just was and I felt comfortable, and all these things were familiar, and it was and then I started to understand that concept that you're just talking about, Turungawawa, and this is my place, and this is where I'm settled. And it was silly little things like, of course, it's the taste of the food, and our
which is like
habits.
What did you miss? What would you like if you were in Northern Ireland right now and you were? My
absolute thing is soda bread. It's my absolute comfort food, and I do make it here, but it's not the same because we don't have the same kind of flour.
Yes.
And so the seafood. You guys have lovely seafood, but it's not.
But it is different.
It's
not.
Up there. Yeah. It's not our frozen to death Atlantic Sea.
Yeah, I don't like British / European fish and so on. They just, I don't know.
Get out of here. No, I am not having that at all. No, absolutely. But
it's sort of tasteless and...
No, oh, come on. Well, you clearly...
No, actually, you're completely right. No, it's not tasteless. It tastes too much. You're actually right. I don't like the cods and the... give me a snapper or a kahawai any day of the...
Right, I'm going to have to give you a list of restaurants to visit before you go, before you leave.
Well, one day I am going to go to, not that he's probably has anything to do with it, but I am going to go to Rick Stein's Padstow, whatever it is, and probably pay like 70 quid or something for a small piece of fish. And we should keep moving because there's so much to talk to you about, but I did want to say... Derry Girls, I loved it. So Andrea put me onto that. I don't know whether it's appropriate or not, but my 10, 8-year-old and 4-year-old have also been loving it. Fortunately, to the extent that there's adult themes, they've been going over their head. It's amazing. And Natalie actually as well, she, like you, I mean, she obviously is not Northern Irish. She grew up in Coventry and went to a Catholic school. And there are a lot of Irish Catholics at that school. So she found it very familiar as well, actually. So recommendation, Derry Girls. I thought it would be, but it's funny.
It's very funny. And the thing that is a kind of a mystery to all of us in Northern Ireland, because we obviously love it, it's cherished now. But we can't understand why the rest of the world gets it. Like, there's very specific humor. So I think that it operates on two levels, because there's a very funny... episode. They're writing divisions on a whiteboard. The priests, what's different between Protestant Catholics and what's similar. And
it's all differences.
And it's all different. And one of the things is Protestants keep their toasters in a cupboard, which to everyone in Northern Ireland is hilarious. It's very funny because it's true.
What is that?
But also, well, it just is. It's just a thing. It's just a difference. I don't know why it is, but it was like no one had ever...
It speaks of deep repression or something.
Probably, yeah. But no one had articulated. But everyone was like, oh, shit, yeah, absolutely. And so, but little things like that are hilarious to us. And also the Christmas cupboard, genius. Because we all have a Christmas cupboard. You keep your stuff for Christmas, like your nice chalky biscuits. And your mum,
yes.
Your mum's
and they ate all of that.
Your mum's at the Crazy Price. We used to, because during the Troubles we didn't have Tesco, I didn't eat at McDonald's until I was 18 because we just didn't have them. But so our supermarket
hadn't lived.
I know. So our supermarket was called Crazy Prices, and so your mum would go to the Crazy Prices and buy the nice biscuits, but that's for the Christmas cupboard. So things like that. But anyway, so Derry Girls. The reason it's awesome and the reason I recommended it is because it's very funny, but also Northern Ireland is having a cultural zeitgeist at the moment. Like, it's like 25 years on from the Belfast Agreement, suddenly it's coming alive and people are recognising that we are our own little special place and we are flipping awesome. And we have all these mad little sayings and little ways that are being celebrated in this TV show. And we have these very Northern Irish phrases, and now you can buy mugs and T-shirts with these phrases on it. Like how like I would greet people in the street. I'd be like, oh hiya. And it's such a Belfast thing that no one else says that. But you can get a mug now. I actually did. It's tragic, but I bought a mug with, oh hiya.
I went to Northern Ireland and all I got was this mug. You're sounding just an incy-wincy but nationalistic, I have to say.
No. But, well, because we're not, I mean, that would, oh my God. Then
There's nothing wrong with that.
No. What I'm saying is we're our own little special place. We are forged because we are not Irish and we're not British. And people fight over these things, but we've sort of shaped our own little cool identity. And you can, I mean, are we a country? Are we not a country? Are we a province? Are we Irish? Are we British? All those, and that's a debate that will rage on for years.
I have to ask you that. We've got to move on, but this is too much. This is too good. But would you, growing up, have said you're British?
I'm Northern Irish. I love going to England, but I'm not English. I lived in Scotland for a long time. I'd probably identify more as Scottish than anything.
There's three things that I love about Trade Depot. Probably more, but three that really stand out to me. The first is the way that Trade Depot is 100% Kiwi owned. I still reckon that counts for something. And what it also means in a really practical sense is they understand you as a Kiwi and what it is you're about. In fact, Trade Depot, they live and they walk the talk. They live and breathe the great Kiwi DIY mindset. The second thing I really, really like, and in fact can spend a lot of time getting sucked into, is that Trade Depot stocks more than 4,500 top quality home improvement products. You heard me right there, 4,500. And that's because it's New Zealand's largest online home improvement store. When you're in there, you can get the colour, the type, the size you want from their top quality home improvement products. The third thing that I really like, and I think is why Trade Depot's doing so well, is low prices always. Low prices always. There's free delivery with minimum spends for Auckland, Hamilton and Christchurch. T's and C's apply. Check out tradedepot.co.nz or call into one of their 3 stores in Auckland, Christchurch or the new superstore in Hamilton near the airport. You are a journalist, and we do know, of course, that journalists are held in even lower regard than politicians.
And used car salesman.
Down there with some other professions, we won't get into that. But you are, I'm not a journalist, but I've hung around with a lot of journalists over the years, and I actually like journalists. You're a senior, deeply experienced and distinguished one. Why'd you do it? I mean, obviously, I now know, I'm not trying to psychoanalyse you here really, but I know your dad was one. You could have been an astronaut. I know you love your dog. You could have been a vet.
I wasn't very good at science, and there was no space program in Belfast, so neither of those things were available.
You needed a Stephen Joyce to get you one.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah, that is true. Probably because my dad was one, and I grew up around it, and I remember being in his office with I swear to God, a typewriter. That's how old I am, and bashing away when my feet didn't hit the ground. And then my poor dad is a very wise man and recognised that journalism is not a profession that's going to get you into a lot of trouble. It's not going to make you any money. So he tried really, really hard to talk me out of it. And so he's like, right, well, if you need to get some experience if you're serious about this. So he was the editor of 3 papers, and so he put me to work in one of the offices where he did not go very often. And so he put me to work in there, and he thought I would spend the summer. So I was doing my part-time job and I was studying, and then in my free time I had to go and work in this office. So he thought I'd be doing like press releases about fates and garden shows and what day the rubbish was collected. But unfortunately, it was the year that the Drumcree riots kicked off, and so the town where I was working was one of the towns where it was a flashpoint. So there I was attending the scene of pipe bombs and bonfires, and very exciting. And so then I was like hooked. So it had the absolute opposite effect of what he intended.
And I don't know if I should. I don't know how you feel about this, but I love it. And I have to mention, you were, of course, News of the World.
I know.
Then through to the Scotsman, and now obviously Stuff. And so that's a heck of a ride from sort of naughty tabloids to I'm sorry, Sinead Boucher, love Stuff, amazing, but slightly more on the earnest side of to use that word again because you liked it so much, spectrum. I mean, how do you? It's what a heck of a ride. How do you reflect on that?
Oh, I think people think that I should, I often get abused on Twitter, like that News of the World hack. And I'm like, yeah, well, I was proud of it. I was 7 years. I did really good work there. Yeah. And I think people obviously have the impression because of the bad behaviour of some reporters that subsequently were prosecuted for their bad behaviour. But in my time there, I did, the thing I liked most about it was that you gave, and this is true, I think, of all journalism, maybe not political journalism, it's kind of the opposite of that, but you give a voice to people who do not have a voice. These people would ring up and they'd be at the absolute end of their tether with whether it was the local council or like there was one series of investigation we did on these people who were getting these cars from these basically corporate loan sharks and just, they couldn't afford to make their payments, and then they'd take the car away, and then they had to still pay for the car, but also the penalties on top of that. And so